She found her bedroom door locked from the outside. At first, the fact registered without panic. It landed in her mind the way a misplaced object does, wrong, but not immediately threatening. She stood in the narrow cone of light cast by her bedside lamp, fingers wrapped around the knob, feeling the faint resistance that hadn't been there before. She turned it once, twice, listening to the soft click that came from the other side of the door, a lock answering her, not hers. She told herself she must be mistaken. She always did that first. The apartment was quiet in the way only late night could manage, when the building seemed to hold its breath. The refrigerator hummed faintly somewhere beyond the walls. Pipes ticked as they cooled. Nothing else moved. No voices, no footsteps, no television murmurs leaking from neighbors' units. It was nearly 3 in the morning. She checked the time just before standing up, feeling that vague sense of unease that sometimes followed her out of sleep. She leaned closer to the door and tried again, slower this time, as if gentleness might convince it to open. The knob rotated smoothly until it stopped, firm and final. Locked. Her lock was a small push button on the inside handle. Cheap, flimsy, something she never used. She hated the idea of sealing herself into rooms. She stepped back, eyes scanning the door automatically, and saw what she hadn't noticed before. The faint outline of a metal bolt, low and near the edge, catching a sliver of light. It wasn't part of the door when she'd moved in. She was sure of that. She had leaned against this door countless times while folding laundry, while talking on the phone, while listening to the rain outside the bedroom window. Her hip would have brushed it. Her fingers would have found it. Her chest tightened. "It's just old hardware," she whispered, testing the sound of her voice. Felt too loud in the stillness. Some leftover thing. She crouched, tracing the bolt with her eyes but not her hands. The metal looked worn, dulled by use, the screws slightly stripped as if tightened and loosened many times. Recently, she thought, and then immediately rejected the idea. She lived alone. She always had. She pressed her palm flat against the door. The wood felt cooler than the air in the room. She pushed gently, then harder, bracing her shoulder against it. The door didn't budge. The pressure traveled back into her bones. A solid refusal. She laughed once, a short, breathy sound, and shook her head. Maybe the door frame had shifted. The building was old. Things swelled and warped with humidity. There had been rain earlier. She told herself this as she moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside to let in the sodium glow of the streetlight below. The light fell strangely, stretching shadows across the floor, making the corners of the room seem deeper than they were. That was when she noticed the closet. The closet door was open an inch. She stood very still, staring at the narrow black line cutting through the white of the door. She was certain she had closed it before going to bed. Certain enough that the thought of being wrong made her scalp prickle. Slowly, she crossed the room and nudged the door wider with her foot. Nothing inside but her clothes hanging quietly, the faint smell of detergent, her shoes lined up beneath. Yet something felt off. The air inside the closet was colder, stale in a way the rest of the room wasn't. She reached in and brushed her hand along the shelf. Dust clung to her fingers, except for one clear streak, as if something had been moved recently. She pulled her hand back, heart beginning to thud. Her gaze drifted, unbidden, to the floor beside the bed. The indentation in the carpet was shallow but unmistakable, the kind left by weight over time. Not where she slept, on the left side, close to the wall. This mark was on the other side, the side she never used. "No," she murmured, though the words sounded weak even to her. She returned to the door and knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed unpleasantly in the small room. "Hello?" she called. "Is someone there?" Silence answered, but in that silence, she became aware of something else. A subtle shift in the light beneath the door. The thin line at the threshold darkened, then brightened, as if a shadow had passed in the hallway. Slowly, her stomach dropped. She lowered herself to her knees and peered at the gap, holding her breath. The hallway light should have been off. She always turned it off. Yet there was a glow there now, dim and yellow, leaking under the door in an uneven band. It pulsed faintly, not flickering exactly, but changing, as if something was moving back and forth in front of it. She reached for the knob again, this time pulling hard, rattling it, letting the sound fill the room. "This isn't funny," she said, louder now. The words tasted strange, like they belonged to someone else. Her phone was on the nightstand. She grabbed it, hands shaking, and unlocked the screen. No signal bars appeared. She frowned, refreshing, turning airplane mode on and off. Nothing. The Wi-Fi icon blinked, searching. A soft sound came from the other side of the door. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't breathing. It was something quieter, like fabric brushing wood. Like someone leaning close, then shifting their weight. She froze, phone clutched to her chest. "You locked it," she said, the realization blooming cold and sharp. "You locked it from out there." The bolt on the door slid, just a fraction of an inch. Not enough to unlock. Enough to let her hear the metal scrape. The room felt smaller then. The walls seemed to inch inward, the ceiling lowering imperceptibly. The air grew thick, pressing against her ears. She backed away from the door until her calves hit the bed, then sat hard, eyes never leaving the handle. Memories surfaced uninvited, finding her pillow slightly warm when she returned from the bathroom. The faint scent of something unfamiliar in the room, gone before she could place it. The way things sometimes weren't where she left them, only slightly wrong, easy to dismiss. She thought of the indentation in the carpet. Another sound, closer now. A gentle test of the door, mirroring her own earlier touch. Pressure applied, released. She slid down onto the floor, hugging her knees, trying to make herself smaller. Her gaze drifted to the closet again, to the dark between the hanging clothes. For a moment, she had the irrational certainty that if the door opened, she would have nowhere to hide. Not because the room was empty, but because it was already occupied. The light under the door went out. In the sudden darkness, the bolt clicked softly. And from the other side, something rested its weight against the door, patient, as if it knew she wasn't going anywhere. A cold hand brushed her ankle as she walked past the couch. She stopped mid-step, the sensation still blooming against her skin. Too deliberate to be fabric, too precise to be air. Her heel hovered above the floor, muscles locked, balance wavering. For half a second she considered the possibility that she had imagined it, that her nerves were misfiring the way they sometimes did when she was overtired. The apartment was cold. She had turned the heat down before bed. Cold air could feel like anything if you weren't paying attention. She slowly set her foot down. Nothing happened. The living room lay before her exactly as she'd left it. The couch sagged slightly in the middle, its dark fabric absorbing what little light spilled in from the kitchen. The television screen reflected the room back at itself. Coffee table, armchair, the narrow hallway leading to the bedroom. Everything flattened and dim. No movement. No sound beyond the refrigerator's distant hum and the ticking of the wall clock, steady and indifferent. She exhaled through her nose and forced herself to keep walking. "Static shock," she murmured, though there had been no spark. Or the throw blanket. The throw blanket lay folded over the arm of the couch, undisturbed. It hadn't reached the floor. She crossed into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and drank it too quickly. The cold settled in her stomach, grounding her. She laughed under her breath at herself. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her head. "You've always had an overactive imagination." She rinsed the glass, set it in the rack, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening. Silence pressed in, thick enough that she could hear her own pulse. She became aware of the apartment in pieces. The faint draft slipping in beneath the front door, the way the overhead light buzzed almost imperceptibly, the shadows pooling in corners where the bulbs didn't quite reach. Felt like the room was waiting. She shook the thought away and turned back toward the living room. As she approached the couch again, she gave it a wide berth, skirting the coffee table instead. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark space beneath the cushions, on the low, black gap between the couch and the floor. The shadows there looked deeper now, denser, as if light bent around them rather than touching them. "You're being ridiculous," she said quietly. Her phone buzzed in her hand, making her flinch. A notification, nothing important. She welcomed the small jolt of normalcy and glanced at the time. Nearly midnight. Too late to be this on edge. Too late to start imagining things creeping out of furniture. She sat on the armchair opposite the couch, knees drawn up, and tried to breathe evenly. From here, she could see the entire room. The couch, the hallway, the front door. She liked control. Visibility. It was why she never turned all the lights off at once. The air felt colder near the floor. She noticed it as a subtle gradient, warmth clinging to her upper body while a chill brushed her ankles, persistent and localized. The heater clicked on with a soft thunk, but the cold remained, coiling around her feet like damp fog. Her gaze dropped, against her will, to the space beneath the couch. "Pipes?" she whispered. "Draft." She leaned forward, stretching her legs out, and deliberately let her toes brush the rug. Nothing reached back. The rug felt coarse, familiar. She waited, counting silently, daring whatever had happened before to repeat itself. Didn't. A strange disappointment flickered through her fear, quickly followed by irritation. She stood, retrieved a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and returned to the living room. The beam cut a narrow path through the dimness as she crouched, heart hammering louder now, and angled the light under the couch. Dust motes swirled in the beam. A lost pen. A sock she'd thought gone forever. The couch's wooden support beam, scuffed and unremarkable. Nothing else. She frowned, sweeping the light from one end to the other. The space looked deeper than it should have been, the darkness receding oddly, as if the couch extended farther back than its dimensions allowed. She reached a hand under, fingers brushing grit and carpet fibers, and felt the solid reassurance of the back wall sooner than her eyes had suggested. She pulled her hand out, embarrassed by the way it trembled. As she stood, something caught her attention on the floor beside the couch. A faint smear in the dust, like the mark left by a palm dragged lightly across the surface. It led from beneath the couch toward the center of the room, then faded. Her skin prickled. She tried to recall when she'd last vacuumed. Yesterday? The day before? She lived alone. No one else should have been making marks on her floor. She straightened abruptly and backed away, scanning the room again. The shadows seemed thicker now, edges blurred, as if the apartment had subtly rearranged itself while she wasn't looking. The hallway felt longer, the corners closer. She became aware, then, of another detail she couldn't immediately explain. The couch cushions were indented, not in the middle where she usually sat, but along the far end, closest to the wall. The fabric bore the faint impression of weight, as though someone had been perched there, leaning forward. The indentation was still sinking back into shape. Her mouth went dry. "No," she said softly, a plea more than a denial. Memories surfaced, unwelcome and sharp. The time she'd found the remote control on the coffee table when she always left it on the armrest. The faint smell of something metallic in the air some nights, gone by morning. The way the apartment sometimes felt warmer when she returned home, as if it had been holding heat, as if it had been occupied. The clock ticked on, each second loud in her ears. She realized she was standing exactly where the smear in the dust ended. Slowly, carefully, she stepped back. The cold returned instantly, brushing her ankle again. Lighter this time, almost curious. She gasped and stumbled, grabbing the armchair for balance. Her flashlight clattered to the floor, rolling until its beam pointed directly under the couch. The darkness there seemed to shift, not moving so much as settling, adjusting to the light. She didn't look away. Her breath came shallow and fast as she backed toward the hallway, eyes fixed on the couch, on the low, patient space beneath it. She didn't know what she expected to see. A hand, a face, proof, but the not knowing was worse. The certainty that something could be there, that it had already touched her, that it had learned where she was. She reached the hallway and flicked on the overhead light. The living room brightened harshly, shadows retreating to their corners. The couch looked like a couch again, harmless. Still, the flashlight beam lay steady on the floor. Nothing moved. She stood there for a long time, listening to the apartment breathe around her, trying to convince herself that fear had filled in the gaps where reason faltered. That cold was just cold. That impressions faded on their own. When she finally turned toward the bedroom, she kept her feet well away from the couch. Behind her, something under it shifted, just enough to make room.